Hello world, I'm just some guy, and this is my review of the DarkSword Armory Medieval Knight Sword, number 1306, link down in the description. My good friend got me one as a birthday present, as well as a Black Prince bastard sword and matching dagger for himself. Maybe I'll do a review of them in a future video. Thanks, bro. Now, on to the unboxing of the sword, which I knew I should have filmed for this video. Live and learn. Everything came wrapped and seemingly well secure. I was tough to get all the plastic off, but I was able to do it without damaging anything. Bit of a worry. When I was getting ready to unveil the sword, had an anticlimax to the prom night moment. It had been damaged in shipping, dropped, blunted tip fairly badly. My friend's Black Prince sword had the same issue, nowhere near as bad. That could have been touched up by a file. Mine required some time on the workshop. More on that later. Now, caveat emptor seems to be DarkSword Armory's attitude about this issue. From what I've seen of reviews, this is a fairly common issue for a while. Dear DarkSword Armory, please do something about this issue. You guys make awesome swords. I'd bet my ass on them in any fight, and I don't say that very often. It really hurts me inside to see all that hard work in a fine weapon product just ruined in shipping. More on how they handled that later. Now, what I would recommend, all sorts of different things. I like cold steel. They're big tubes that they use for shipping. They're fairly redundant. They use them in their absolute proof video for testing. I think that they would solve it here. I'd be willing to pay more for shipping if they came in a secure container that would guarantee they're in 100% new condition every time. I can summarize my opinion with a joke. The sword was in worse shape from coming to me in the mail from Eastern Canada to Alaska than it was in the very awesome abusive testing DarkSword Armory put the swords through on their channel, cutting cinder blocks on an anvil. I can only conclude that whatever happens in the mail is worse than cutting cinder blocks on an anvil, and the swords need to be more adequately protected from it. If it were me, I'd just put them in the scabbard themselves and seal them up as usual. Now, onto the sword itself. As you can see here, I reshaped the tip on my Work Sharp Ken Onion Edition. Big shout out to Scalagrim for recommending that product. Subscribe to his channel. Now, it took a little bit. You can see I lost a little bit of the tip right there, but I was able to restore the shape, and it's no harm done. I think it's about as much damage as you'd expect if the sword was in a real fight and you had stabbed something that wasn't clothing or soft tissue, you know? Armor, especially plate, or the boss of a shield. You'd had a real impact on something. You'd have to do that kind of touching up anyways. You can see the scuffs and marks along the blade. That's from the brush and tree that I was cutting. The tree is what broke the blade, not the brush, not the alders. The rust on there is from it being in storage. I oiled it pretty good, but I also must have handled the blade since it was broken. That has come from weeks of being stuck in my closet and neglected, basically, once I found out that this could not be repaired. But you can see there's very superficial damage to the shine of it. I'm sure a quick polishing would take out going through all the thorn bushes and devil's clubs and other things that I put the sword through. The sword was unsharpened when it came to me. I sharpened it myself on that Work Sharp Ken Onion Edition. I set it to 25 degrees, no secondary bevel, put a pretty nice edge on it. It said, with the little certificate that came in the box, that it was paper cutting sharp. Well, I tested the factory edge on 3 kinds of paper, and that's not what it was. Maybe they meant to put that piece of paper in blades that had been sharpened from the factory. This was ordered unsharpened. Either way, it took a nice edge and it held it. There was no edge damage from all the abuse that it took to destroy this sword. There's one tiny nick, if I can find it, somewhere up at the tip where when I was hitting something on the ground, I hit a rock. Here it is. If you can see that little nick right there. Let's see if we can get that camera to focus. It's microscopic, and you really need to look close to tell. Fingernails on it now. That's what happens when it hits a rock, and I'm pretty sure the rock got the worst of it. This had such a fine cutting edge on it that I'm pretty sure it would work even with a 22.5 degree edge, but I like the 25 degree edge I put on there because it held up just fine, and twill serve, twill serve. Now, the sword itself, this is an oak shot, type 14 blade. I'm not very familiar with what the numbers and oak shots typology all mean, but I do see the different characteristics of the sword and what they mean for handling and capability. Broad tips versus pointed tips, wheel pommels versus scent stopper pommels, things like that. Big shout out to Schola Gladiatoria. All 1800 of your videos taught me well. Good source of information. Go subscribe. Now, what the Type 14 blade means is that this is essentially triangular. The edges are not parallel up to here to when they taper. That's more like a Viking sword, and that's a much better cutter. This is much lighter at the point, much more nimble, not as nimble as a rapier, but more of that kind of quality. You lose a lot of the ability to chop, but you still retain your ability to cut. It's like going through vegetables. Viking swords, katanas, machetes, they are very good at this motion. The tapered edge of the tapered tip of this means that the chop is mostly lost. When you draw the edge back, it is much more effective as a cutter. And this will still happily remove limbs and other such things. The thrusting power on this was out of this world, like nothing else I'd ever experienced. It would produce a nasty, nasty wound channel, and I didn't find any flex on the blade. This particular one has a wheel pommel. These swords were generally used with shields, either, Gothic shields, bucklers, heater shields, things like that. The wheel pommel tends to help more with striking because it puts the weight in the same plane as the movement of the edge during cuts. Scent stopper pommels are a little bit more round, and they help more with the parrying and blocking motions as if this sword was to be used independently. I love the aesthetic. I love the shape of the quillons. I love the crossguards gently curving forward like that. I love their octagonal design. I think that would be very effective, and I also find it aesthetically pleasing. The grip is probably my favorite part of this sword. I love the shape and texture of it. I love the ridges. I think that's a brilliant idea because each finger has a ridge to hold up against, and that really helps feel the edge alignment, feel that you're holding the sword at the proper part of the grip, and it helps prevent you from slipping should it get bloody, wet, oily, anything else. And it's just a good index. If I can't see to grab the sword in the proper place, I can feel it, and when it's in the right place, it's locked in and it's going nowhere. And I can't think of much of an improvement. Maybe if I was to train for a long time, and if this had a screw-on pommel instead of a hot-peened pommel, I could change the grip to a custom one, but I'd have to learn a lot before I could think of something much better than this. Maybe put beeswax on it. Very good, especially for the price. Scabbard, this is the basic one that just came with the sword. Nothing special about it. It didn't have the sword belt option, but I found it held up pretty well from just me walking around with it in the woods for the little time that I had. And I could happily walk around my house with this just thrust through my belt as if it was the saya of a katana. It was still fairly comfortable and I could get the sword out without much problem. But I intend to get a sword belt to actually wear and carry this thing. Perhaps a serious disadvantage of this sword, though, is the nature of the pommel. By not being screwed, you cannot use the secret, forbidden technique of ending people rightly. This is a significant disadvantage and must be considered when selecting this weapon. The fuller on the blade looks amazing. As with any sword made the way that these are, some of these are hit or miss, and me and my friend who bought it, looking at it, it looks almost as if it was something that was made on a factory or cast this way, and we know it wasn't, and if you really get your eye down in there, you can see some of the imperfections, but without doing it, it looks perfect to my eye. I am very, very impressed. They did good work on this. The sword, when it came, it was all very solid construction, completely solid, no jiggle, no wobble, and up until the strike, before I broke it, it was 100% okay, and I would have not known anything's wrong. Now, I'm going to tell you about how I actually broke the sword. I basically took it out in the woods. I had 20 minutes of cutting on light targets like devil's club, brush, poison celery, even alders that are perhaps this big around. It went through them very nicely, especially at about this diameter, as if they were tatami mats with a katana. Very clean cuts, especially pulling back and doing the draw cut. And then I started chopping down a tree. In my part 2, you'll get to see that tree and what it was. If you go check out Skallagrim's video of how he tested the Oslo Viking sword, I put this thing through a way more rigorous torture test. I was cutting tougher wood, thicker wood, and hitting it harder. I was deliberately not cutting at an angle to remove wood so it would just be full force. And I was getting a lot of flex in the blade and ping back and vibration and things I had been told 100 times to beware on sword safety, but my confidence in this blade after the torture testing and the gradual ramping up of pressure that I had put it through, it led me to get carried away, and I thought I could just wail on trees and cut them down with impunity. It did good on the soft dead stuff. When I got to the hard side of the tree, after 20 minutes of hitting this tree, I got a flying helicopter of death. As you can see, it's separated right there at the tang. The flying helicopter of death was at about at my head level, but I just stepped back and no harm done. Probably would have done some damage to my face or hands if it had hit me, though. It had a fair amount of velocity. But of course, I got what was justly coming to me. What could I have expected? Now, on the abusive testing that DarkSword Armory did, I actually applaud them for stepping up to Cold Steel's absolute proof challenge. When the CEO said, oh, no one else has ever tested their weapons like ours, no one else has ever proven any of their claims, well, DarkSword Armory and Zombie Tools kinda did, and I think their tests are more abusive and hardcore than Cold Steel's. And that's why I will be buying DarkSword Armory weapons, because I know exactly how tough they are, and exactly how much they can take, and I'm thoroughly impressed. I'm going to be getting another one of these, and I'm going to have no regrets. I would 100% recommend the products of this company. At the very least, the two I've mentioned here, the Medieval Knight Sword and the Black Prince Sword, which maybe I'll talk about at some other time, which is not broken. In conclusion, if I had to go to the world of Skyrim, Berserk, Final Fantasy Tactics, or just back to the actual historical High Middle Ages, this is the type of sword that I would pick. And not just this type of sword, I would want one of these. I would feel very good because I know exactly how much they can handle and what I can do with them, and it's very satisfactory. And remember, don't quote me on anything. I'm no sensei, I'm no expert, I'm no great hero or big epic warrior. I'm just some guy. May you live long and prosper.